Good day, everyone. We come to the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 11. It is tempting to skip over the fourth petition as it seems straightforward, rather uninteresting, and overly familiar. Many of the earliest commentators, according to John Stott, quote, could not believe that Jesus intended our first request to be for literal bread. It seemed to them improper, especially after the noble three opening petitions relating to God's glory, that we should abruptly descend to so mundane and material a concern. So they allegorized the petition. The bread he meant must be spiritual, they said. Early church fathers like Tertullian, Cyprian, and Augustine thought the reference was either to the invisible bread of the Word of God or to the Lord's Supper. Jerome, in the Latin Vulgate, translated the Greek word for daily by the monstrous adjective supersubstantial, and by this he meant the Holy Communion. End quote. The Reformers, on the other hand, rejected such allegorizing or spiritualizing of the text. John Calvin referred to such approaches as, quote, exceedingly absurd, end quote. Martin Luther wrote that bread was a symbol for, quote, everything necessary for the preservation of life, like food, a healthy body, good weather, house, home, wife, children, good government, and peace, end quote. The petition literally reads, give us today our ton epiousion bread. The crux interpretum is the word epiousios. There is tremendous scholarly debate as to the meaning of this term, which only occurs in Matthew 6, verse 11, the parallel in Luke 11, verse 3, and in a later writing, the Didache 8.2, which is dependent on Matthew chapter 6, verse 11. We will omit discussion of the debate since, as Hans-Dieter Betz notes in his massive study of the Sermon on the Mount, quote, a fully convincing explanation and translation cannot be given even today, end quote, and we are certainly in no position to arbitrate the debate. English translations almost universally render the word daily, and this is probably the best interpretation. Most scholars believe the term means for the present day or for the coming day. The New American Standard Bible has a footnote that takes the latter reading and translates it tomorrow. Either way, Charles Quarles notes, it refers to, quote, the daily ration of food needed by the disciple, end quote. There is no tension, even though some scholars believe that there is, between the petition and Jesus' later statement in verse 25, not to be anxious about what you will eat. As Quarles notes, quote, proper prayer is the antithesis and corrective to the anxiety discussed later in Matthew 6. Anxiety wrings its hands, faith folds its hands. Anxiety paces the floor, faith kneels on the floor. Prayer is an exercise of faith, not a display of anxiety, end quote. Several biblical texts help us to understand this petition more clearly. For instance, in Exodus chapter 16, God provided manna for the hungry Israelites who were grumbling against Moses and Aaron, verses 2 and 3. According to the instructions given in verse 4, they were only to gather a day's portion every day, except for on the day before the Sabbath when they were to gather a double portion, verse 22. Verse 4 states that the daily portion was to test the Israelites, That is, to test their trust and faith in God to provide for their needs. Deuteronomy 29, verse 6, specifically says that it was done, quote, that you may know that I am the Lord your God, end quote. Charles Quarles suggests that Deuteronomy 31, verse 20, expresses the concern that God had for the Israelites. That text reads, when I bring them into the land I swore to give their fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey, they will eat their fill and prosper. They will turn to other gods and worship them, despising me and breaking my covenant. In the next chapter, we read, then Jeshurun became fat and rebelled. You became fat, bloated, and gorged. He abandoned the God who made him and scorned the rock of his salvation. Chapter 32, verse 15. Quarles writes, quote, when God's people had an abundance of provisions, they tended to lose their sense of dependence on him and to stray from him, end quote. Is this not true of us also? When we have an abundance, we fail not only to thank God, but to remember that he is the source of all our provisions. Two other passages are particularly helpful and echo the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer. Proverbs 30, verses 7 and 9 through 9, and 1 Timothy 6, 6 through 8. In the first, Agar prayed, 2 things I ask of you. Don't deny them to me before I die. Keep falsehood and deceitful words far from me. Give me neither poverty nor wealth. Feed me with the food I need. Otherwise I might have too much and deny you, saying, who is the Lord? Or I might have nothing and steal, profaning the name of my God. The Apostle Paul similarly wrote, but godliness with contentment is a great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. The fourth petition then, give us today our daily bread, is a prayer that we would depend on God to provide daily for each day's needs and give him thanks and glory for his goodness toward us. It is also a reminder that we would not turn from God and profane his name, but that we would remember from whence come the provisions that we enjoy. May the Lord bless you with this study, and may his word transform us, and may we live according to its principles.